Now, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts was the former Assistant Secretary of State, the former head editor of the Wall Street Journal, and, of course, a best-selling author on many of the top think tanks in Washington as well. So he's, a big former insider. And he has talked a lot about the fact that there is insanity by the ruling elite. He was involved in the collapse of the Soviet Union and negotiating that with them. He's warned that Russia may use nuclear weapons. Well, they came out, Putin last week, and said that we were preparing to use nuclear weapons if you continue to send in armor to attack us. Cracks in Washington's empire, Washington's EU vassals might be finding their backbone. Roberts reported on this on the 18th. A day later, it was in AP, Reuters, everywhere, basically the same headline, that a whole bunch of countries, Switzerland, Luxembourg, South Korea, Japan, Australia, and others, joined, and also Britain, Germany, France, and Italy, to get into the Chinese-led Asian Investment Bank. But some of the elite over here are investing as well. So this is a big deal. It's a challenge to the IMF and World Bank to dollar hegemon that the globalists have been using to abuse U.S. power and really destroying it long-term in the process and destroying our soft power, to quote Roberts. So, Roberts, I'm going to shut up. You've got the floor for the next 10 minutes or so, and I'll come back in with some other areas I want to get into. But it does look like some of the first cracks in the bravada, in the chutzpah. How big a deal are Putin's announcements about nukes, and how big a deal is the situation? And then how does that tie into Yellen saying we may raise rates a little? What's really going on?
Well, as you know, Alex, a great deal is going on. The Chinese, by bringing out this new Asian investment bank, are in the process of displacing Washington's Asian Development Bank. Washington uses development banks, whether the Asian one or the World Bank or other of its financial creatures, such as IMF, to impose its financial and political hegemony on other countries. China is much more clever and has created this new bank in order to actually help countries and build friendships and to build trust. And no one any longer trusts Washington. They know that it's a bully and that whatever it holds out to you is just a harness to put you in. So the surprising development was the rapidity with which American puppet states like Great Britain, I mean, Great Britain is a total American puppet state. They had never make a decision without asking Washington what they should decide. And yet Britain accepted this despite Washington's warning and opposition. So did France, Germany, and Italy. And then Australia and South Korea, which initially had turned down the Chinese invitation to join as a result of Washington's pressure on them, are now reconsidering.
What's precipitating this?
I think what's precipitating it is Washington is now so reckless. It's so full of arrogance and hubris, and really it's a megalomaniac. And the world is beginning to realize that they're under threat of destruction by the incessant lies coming out of Washington about war, particularly with regard to Russia and to China. These incessant lies about Russian invasions of Ukraine, about a pending Russian invasion of the Baltics and Poland. And they realize that Washington is so out of control in its own mind that its power is slipping, that it's going to drive the whole world into a war in order to try to prevent the rise of Russia and China. And so they're showing a move away from this control. They're trying to show that the empire's alliances are shaky and that Washington needs to pull in its horns and back off. I think that's really what's going on. In addition, the financial interest in those countries have to be disturbed by the massive creation of money and debt in the United States. You know, the money and debt in the last 6 or 7 years has grown many multiples times greater than the gross domestic product that has to support that money and debt. And so the whole notion of Washington as some sort of a financial safe house is diminishing. When you look at China, is really the only country in the world that has massive independent reserves. It's the soundest financial system there is. And so I think they're saying, hey, look, we better remember that we can go down with the Americans if we don't make some sort of hedge against our American bet.
And those hedges can expand quickly. Putin's now called for a Eurasian currency union as well. So this saber rattling is forcing people out of very compliant stance they were in just 6 years ago into a obstinate stance.
You summed it up very well, Alex. It's exactly what's happening.
What's wrong with Washington? Because it's now national news. Drudge Report picked it up. Official Army document, it's public, says they list conservative areas, libertarian areas of California, Texas, and Utah as areas they think might have an uprising, and they're having a joint forces command training to take on domestic groups. And they list Texas as an enemy hostile. I mean, this is reaching Twilight Zone proportions. Who in the world would train the Pentagon and then publicly put out? I mean, we know the Pentagon had plans to invade Canada, but that doesn't mean they're going to do it. But they're actually training in huge military operations coming up this summer to basically invade Texas.
You mean in the event of instability?
Yes.
Economic collapse and some sort of, yeah. Well, we'll find out how tough Texans are. You know, Texas is a big place, kind of like Afghanistan. And if after 14 years, Washington couldn't defeat a few thousand lightly armed Taliban, it's not likely to defeat the Texans. But we'll see what happens. Clearly, as you say, Washington is insane. They're unstable. They're mentally unstable. They're not just psychopaths.
Well, clearly they're insane, drawing up war plans on Texas.
And Utah. Yeah. Look, what does, for example, what does Utah Senator Orrin Hatch think about this?
There's never anything out of any of them.
War plans against his home state. What do the Texas senators think? What does George W. Bush think? There he is sitting in Texas. And Washington is drawing up plans to invade Texas. Will he be a victim too?
Well, remember 3 years ago when the legislature passed in the House unanimously that they would indict people for groping at the TSA, and then before it passed the Senate, it was in the AP, they said, we'll put F-16s in and embargo aircraft. The immediate response was the same thing that started the Civil War, a blockade. That shows the hubris. You used to be in Washington at the highest levels. How has it changed since you were at the highest levels?
It's a different country, Alex. It's a different country. It's nothing like what it was like when I was there. I mean, not that it was any kind of idealistic place. There was a lot of corruption and cowardice and scheming and illegality and immorality. But compared to what it is now, it was like heaven. There's no...
What was Ronald Reagan like, who you knew, I guess, pretty good from what I've read, and he credited you for Reaganomics. What was he like versus what we have now?
Well, he never would have done any of this stuff. He respected the Oval Office. He respected the Constitution. The kind of bad things he got roped into doing was part of forcing the Soviets to negotiate the end of the Cold War. For example, Grenada, Nicaragua. The neocons in the government, before he fired them, told him that you can't let there be a left-wing takeover in the Caribbean or in Central America because it will encourage the Soviets. And you'll never get them to negotiate the end of the Cold War. Well, that was his main goal, to end the Cold War and to cure the stagflation. And he said you had to first fix the economy so you would have the resources with which to threaten the Russians and drive them to negotiate. And so the kinds of bad things he got roped into doing was the neocons using his main goal to achieve some of their ends.
As the head of policy at the Treasury, number 2 guy there, sitting down with Reagan, how were you able, over all of their objections, able to get him to take on your economic plan that did create one of the biggest booms we've seen in the last century?
Well, actually, he took it on before he got into office as part of his campaign. And when he got there, he realized he was going to have a hard time getting it out of his government. And so he appointed me to get his program out of his own government so it could be voted on in Congress. So I didn't have to sell him on anything. He was already sold on it, and he put me in charge of it because he knew I was committed to it.
What would Ronald Reagan think today if he was seeing all this?
Oh, he would think that we had been taken over by the Nazis or something. He would be astonished. He wouldn't be able to understand it. He was, this is not my country. You know, look, what the United States has been doing the entirety of the 21st century is murdering people. I mean, the United States has become Murder Incorporated. It murders people. All it does is murder people. It's 7 or 8 countries have been repeatedly invaded, bombed, droned. Some of them are in total ruins. We're talking about millions of people either dead, maimed, or displaced. And it's ongoing. Now they're starting on Russia. See, Ukraine is being sacrificed. I mean, it's a basket case. And it's all to stop the rise of Russia. We were going to get into this anyhow, but we're...
Yeah, let's talk about Putin's statements.
Well, initially, Putin thought that Russia was now part of the West. We're part of you. We're going to get along with you. He got into the World Trade Organization. He was the G7 was expanded to the G8. Everything was fine until the United States went in, organized a coup in Kiev, threw out the elected government, put in a puppet government, essentially a Nazi government that hates Russians, and they started killing Russians, destroying Russian war monuments, threatening the Russian populations in eastern and southern Ukraine. And Putin realized that the Americans would use Ukraine to grab the Soviet naval base in Crimea, the only warm water port. And so he said, holy smoke, they're after us. And so he has been gradually catching on that this wasn't some kind of mistake that got away from the Americans, that this was an intention, and that the United States intends to turn Russia into a vassal state, just like everybody else. And he realizes that that's not going to happen. And so he keeps issuing warnings. They get stronger, and they get stronger, and they get stronger. And he's relying, I think perhaps mistakenly, but maybe not, he's relying on the main European powers, such as Germany and France, to realize that their populations, their life, their existence is being threatened by Washington by pushing them into a conflict situation with Russia. And so he's relying on the French and the Germans to simply leave NATO or put their foot down or start blocking the American aggression against Russia. It's very difficult for Washington to carry this on without the complicity of Europe.
Well, the Germans lost 21 million people in World War II. That was just 65, 70 years ago. The Russians lost that same amount. You'd think it'd be fresh in their minds not to have a war with Russia.
Well, I think it is. I think that's not what... I mean, a few of their crazy generals. But other than that, the population is totally against this, you know, and many of the members of the German parliament, the former chancellors and political leaders have all come out telling Merkel, you really got to stop being Washington's puppet. We can't take these kinds of risks. It's not in the interest of Germany or Europe.
You think they're blackmailing Merkel?
Oh, sure. Of course they are. But there's no, you know, would you let somebody blackmail you if the consequence was going to be the destruction of life on Earth?
No.
No. And I think that she's just slow on the uptake. She's not, you know, it's not like she's some kind of genius. And so many people are inculcated into the American myth that we are the white hats and the salt of the earth and the exceptional and the indispensable and the good guys and blah, blah, blah. It takes them a while to see the reality. And we did see that Merkel and Hollande went to Russia to negotiate with Putin an end of the Ukraine crisis. And they did that over Washington's objection. And you see every day that Washington is doing everything it possibly can to upset the agreement that Merkel and Hollande.
But you're saying overall things are going in a little bit better direction now. Correct me if I'm wrong. When we come back from break in the final segment, then I want to ask you about the latest policy announcements out of the Federal Reserve on interest rates and just your brief take on the current climate in the economy. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, paulcraigroberts.org. This is an amazing website. Stay with us. Hunters.
In communities of this kind, despotism stands a good chance.
The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Okay, Ms. Hughes, well, we're going to do everything we can to help you.
Resistance to tyrants is obedience to God. It's the Alex Jones Show, because there is a war on for your mind.
PaulCraigRoberts.org, Infowars.com, PrisonPlanet.com. I can just tell you, not being dramatic, there's a lot of stuff being done behind the scenes to mess with us, to shut us down. It's only intensifying our efforts. Thanks to your prayers and support out there. They really mess with a lot of folks. You need to understand, we really do have a tyranny. But you can't be scared of it and then think that cowering will make it all go away. Getting in its face will bring it down. And a lot of people in government are upset about what's happening. We had William Binney here in studio the other day, former technical director of the NSA. He says most people he talks to in government are totally freaked out and awake. So I don't see how long this can go. Dr. Roberts, finishing up on the state of the economy, the Federal Reserve's announcements, and just your gut feeling about, are things starting to turn a little bit, or are we still in really bad trouble?
We're in really bad trouble. But first, Alex, let me finish up our prior conversation.
Yes.
I don't want to leave it on an optimistic foot. What's happening right now is the United States is busy at work causing either coups or color revolutions in Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. So, and they're renewing the conflict in Ukraine. Washington is doing everything it can to destroy the agreement that was achieved in Minsk. So soon Russia is going to have 4 Ukraines. They're going to have it back in Ukraine, and they're going to have it in 3 countries along their underbelly border with Asia. Recently, Victoria Nuland was sent to Armenia to put in motion the color revolution there. They have pulled out of retirement a notorious color revolution agent and sent him to Kyrgyzstan to destabilize that country. And they've got another one of those terrible people in Uzbekistan.
And let's be clear, they then put people like Joe Biden's son over multi-billion-dollar infrastructures, gas facilities and things to milk them. So it's a classical mafia tactic. They're not liberating these countries. They're coming in to destabilize them and steal Russian-funded infrastructure.
Well, they're going to do that, but the main purpose is to create instability for Russia in order that Russia cannot rise as a power that can check American purposes. So if Russia's got 4 Ukraines on its border, it's completely used up, and it's no longer in America's way. And also the trouble they're causing in Uzbekistan, this can spill over into China. And so they can simultaneously cause trouble for Russia, for China, to get splits between Russia and China on how to deal with the issue because their interests differ somewhat in that part of the world. And so this is a very clever policy at destabilizing the other 2 rising powers. And I think it's going to lead to a major war. Now, that said, we can turn to the Fed. What the Fed has done, first of all, the Fed is no longer an independent agency managing the economic policy in behalf of the country. They are a special interest group that represents 4 or 5 major banks. Banks that deregulation, that free market deregulation, let get too big to fail. And so the entirety of American economic policy since 2008 has had one single purpose, and that's to keep 4 big banks afloat. In order to keep those big banks afloat, they had to create trillions of new money in order to purchase the worthless assets that the banks...
Sure, Doctor, do 5 more minutes with us in overdrive and put bookends on this because it's so important. And then I want to go back in a minute or so and talk about this big war you're warning about. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former head of policy at the Treasury Department, is an expert economist and can tell us what he sees going on with the Fed. Some countries are going below zero in interest rates. They're talking about going up a little bit. We see a lot of mainstream news admitting the economic outlook is grim. So, Dr. Roberts, give us your prognosis on that.
Okay. They talk about maybe pushing interest rates up in order to make people a little more comfortable holding dollars, because the whole world understands that you can't have massive creation of money and debt and negative interest rates. And so when they talk about raising interest rates, it's just talk to try to block flight from the dollar. That's all it is, because if they raise the interest rates, the stock market's going to collapse, the bond market's going to collapse. And they've got chaos. When you've spent trillions of dollars to save 4 banks since 2008, these are the banks that deregulation allowed to get too large, and these are banks that gamble. They don't make normal loans. They gamble in a casino, and they don't cover their bets. The taxpayers cover the bets, and the Federal Reserve covers the bets by printing money and buying the bad bets. And that's what American economic policy is. That's what the Fed is locked into. It really has no way to get out of it. It can't get out of it. And it's stuck with it. And because it wouldn't let the banks fail, because the banks control the Fed. Look, who have the secretaries of the Treasury been? It's the former banksters who caused the financial crisis. Every one of them have rotated through the Treasury. So they're protecting their own mistakes. Look at the Fed. What is the Fed? It's the same people. Look at the New York Fed. Who are the directors of the New York Fed? It's the same banks.
Everybody at the Justice Department at the top is part of those lobbying groups and consulting groups that write the regulations and the policies and file the papers to let the big banks get away with the derivatives. I mean, it's just a revolving door.
It's one small group, and they control the economic policy. So how are they going to take a decision that blows up everything they've been trying to do? So they'll keep this going as long as they can. They have everything rigged. It's a house of cards, but it's standing, and it will continue to stand as long as foreign countries are willing to hold the dollar.
What does it signify that even The Guardian reports that a lot of these big banker heads, billionaires, are building secret airstrips and redoubts in New Zealand and in the Ozarks, and that they're scared getting bodyguards?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what it means, but what we do know is the country does not have an economic policy that serves the country or serves business or serves economic growth. You see, they tell you that the Fed's policy is designed to encourage the economy, but we don't see a recovery.
Sure.
There's no recovery. They make one up, but there's not, because they don't count the unemployed people.
It's amazing. It's just insanity. In the minute we have left, I don't know how these 4 or 5 mega banks think they're going to survive a nuclear war with Russia, but maybe they're so arrogant they think that they're immune from that.
The neoconservatives think that the United States can win the nuclear war because our stuff is better than the Russians. And we have ABMs, anti-ballistic missiles. And so when the Russians try to retaliate to our first strike, we'll shoot their missiles down. So this is the myth. I'm reading a book now by, I think, Andrew Coben. It's called, what is it called?
It doesn't matter. But
anyhow, he shows that the United States has endless faith in technology as a way of conducting war, and it always fails. It has never worked, ever. It didn't work in Vietnam.
We know the Russians are going to have subs pop up with cruise missiles and blow up every... I mean, it's going to be an absolute disaster. Sure, we'll destroy them worse, but there's so many nukes it'll destroy the whole planet. It's insane.
It's insane, but everybody in Washington is insane. You know, I have no confidence, Alex, that there's anybody in the government that has an ounce of integrity or an ounce of morality.
It's scary. We're going to talk to you more about this in the future. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, thank you so much. Have a great weekend, sir. Kiss your grandchildren.